Hi, good afternoon. If you're new here, my name is Brian Brew, and I have over 30 years of leadership experience. And today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I've written a bunch of questions that I've received, that's not focusing, a bunch of questions that I've received over the past couple of years on leadership, and I'm going to randomly pull a card and talk about my answer. So we'll see how this goes. So the first question is, how do you handle criticism? This is an interesting topic. Every time somebody criticizes you, they're either coming from a place where they're uncomfortable with themselves, and so they are picking out something in you to belittle to make you feel better, or to make themselves feel better, or there is some level of truth behind what they're telling you. And so the way I handle criticism is I take on board what the message was without assuming ill intent. So what that might look like is somebody says, "I can't believe you're wearing that t-shirt on this YouTube video." Well, I can take that on board and say, "Oh my gosh, I should never do that again." Or I can look at it completely different and say, "Hey, people didn't like my shirt. That's their decision. I like this shirt. That's my decision." And I can move on. The key when you receive criticism, in my opinion, is to really dig through what you received, remove the emotional response, which might take some time, right? Remove that emotional response and say, what nugget from this criticism is of value to me that I can apply to my life moving forward? And you take that piece and you disregard the rest. So that's how I handle criticism. All right, next one. What behavior have you seen derail more leaders' careers? Oh, this is a good one. The thing that I believe I have seen that has derailed more leaders' careers are two separate behaviors. So I'll start with the first one, is not listening to their development actions. So some companies give you formal development actions. Some organizations, I shouldn't limit that to companies, give you formal development actions. And those come from a place of either identifying a weakness where you need to gain strength, or identifying a strength that you should double down on, depending on how the leadership culture is at that organization. Now, in both cases, they're sending an important message. So what do you do if it's about a weakness? Well, a couple of things. One, you need to determine if that weakness is something that will, in fact, derail your career, even if it's just your career at that organization. And then you need to really dig in and say, what is the behavior I need to modify? Because you may look at it as something that's a weakness, and you may say, I shouldn't need to cover all of my weaknesses, because as a member of a team, we have that weakness covered, which is a fair point of view. But somebody put it there, somebody gave you that feedback for a reason. And so you really need to look for the nugget, very similar to the criticism question before this one. You have to look for the nugget of goodness in that feedback and say, what behaviors of mine do I need to modify to remove, or remove's the wrong word. What's the piece, what is the takeaway that I need to fix here? What's the behavior I need to repair or change? What are the steps that I have to take to change it? And how long does it take me to do that? So if you received that kind of feedback, you should go ahead and ask some follow-up questions. Ask the person who gave you that feedback if they can give you an example of the behavior that they believe that you need to correct, and an example of the behavior they would have liked to see in that same scenario. That way you have a very clear comparison. And if they can't give you specifics, you might want to ask them if they received that feedback from others, and if there are some other people who could give you some specifics. So that's one behavior that I've seen derail leaders. They think they've sort of got it figured out. They've got X number of years of experience, like myself, with 30 years of experience, and they say, I know all there is to know about this, and I don't have to change. You're coming from a place of not understanding, and that's why you think I have to change. That's a very narrow view of the world, and it's based on hubris, and it's not a good approach to take. The flip side of that is sort of directly related. The other area where I've seen, or the other behavior that I've seen that has derailed leaders' careers, is actually the absence of a very critical or crucial behavior, which is they've stopped learning. So they're no longer doing things to continue to improve themselves. And I think whether you're a leader in the workplace or you're in a managerial position where you're expected to lead, so what some people might call a leadership position, that continual growth is absolutely important. Something that you need to think about in the organization where you work or volunteer, or wherever it is that you go to seek fulfillment. That organization is going to evolve and change over time. It has to, or it will cease to be, or it will have mission drift if it's a not-for-profit organization, for example, that may take it from its original point of view and make it a place where maybe you don't want to be, or you don't want to, or no longer aligns with your values. In either case, an organization that doesn't grow and evolve fails in some way, shape, fashion, or form. And the same thing is true for a leader. A leader who doesn't grow and change will end up failing. They'll no longer be what's needed by the organization, or more importantly, the people in the organization. And so that is a behavior that I see leaders not do that derails their careers. All right, so the next question. And no, I don't know how many questions I put in this stack. Whew, this one's a doozy. How do you find your purpose? I've been talking to somebody about this recently. This is a question that she posed to me, and it's really got my brain firing on all cylinders, if you will. So I think that there are people who learn their purpose at a very young age for whatever reason. Maybe because of their spiritual life, maybe because of their home life. If you've ever heard Tony Robbins speak, you've heard him talk about wanting to feed 1 billion people, or he might be at 10 billion now, I can't recall. But it comes from a childhood of always wondering where your next meal was coming from. So some people find their purpose very early, and maybe not because of terrific circumstances. And I say that to say most people that I have interacted with in my life did not find their purpose at a young age. And I think that there's a lot of pressure that we see in with social media and with a lot of modern articles that tell people they should have a purpose and they should be pursuing it, and they haven't found it, and so they think they're somehow behind, and they should abandon that thought. Your purpose is something that will come to you if you are seeking it. And so what you might find is that rather than aggressively looking for a purpose, seeking a purpose, you might find that what you really need to be seeking are experiences. And from those experiences, you will find the things that uplift you, the things that bring you joy, and the things that very specifically bring you a deep sense of fulfillment. And you'll begin to hone in on what that purpose might be. Other people, I'll use myself as an example, look back as a part of a regular set or cycle of introspection, look backwards and say, what are the patterns that have held throughout my life that I keep going back to, that are positive patterns, not negative patterns. And maybe your purpose lies in there. So all that to say, there is no one answer, in my opinion, on how you find your purpose or know your purpose. I do believe that you will know it when you see it, kind of the old bring me a painted rock game of, that is a pretty painted rock, but it's not the rock I was looking for. You will know it when you see it, or in this case, in the case of purpose, you'll know it when you feel it, might be a little more accurate. And it does require introspection. It does require a seeking mindset, but you should not be overwhelmed or overcome by looking for your purpose. You will figure it out if you are open to finding it. All right, so that was a tough one. It's a tough question. I hear it a lot. I see all kinds of advice on the internet of disappear for 6 months and don't let people see what you're doing and all these other things. And there's a myriad books on the topic, but I do think that the reality is the more experiences you expose yourself, the more likely you are to find your purpose. All right. This one is, how do you define success? This is an important topic, separate and apart from actually answering the question. Each person has to establish their own definition of success. And that definition really has to take into account several factors. And those are factors that you set for yourself. They're not factors that other people set. If you're worried about what your next door neighbor thinks success means, and then striving to achieve their definition of success, you won't find what you're looking for. So I would offer anybody asking that question or asking themselves that question to take a step back and say, what are the things that I value? And then inside of those things that I value, what do I hope to achieve for each one? So if you have a family, for example, what do I hope to achieve with my family? Do I hope to be the best father I can be? Do I hope to be the best mother I can be? What are those things? And define what success looks like in that facet of your life. And then look at the other facets of your life and define success separately for those. And then you have to marry them. So in some way, shape, fashion, or form, you have to amalgamate those various definitions of success to find your personal definition of success. So the question was, how do I define success? Which is a question about me, but I chose to answer it by helping other people hopefully find a way to construct success. And so for how do I define success is not something I have a measure for. So this isn't a goal. It's how I define success. When I say it's not a goal, I mean it doesn't follow the SMART framework, where you've got to make sure that things are singular, they're measurable, etc. Rather, I see success as an ongoing journey for myself. And for me, the more leaders I can grow, the more I believe that I will be successful. And that is both in the workplace and in the home. So my children are now adults, and I'm blessed with currently 5 grandchildren. And so seeing how my kids have become parents and how they are doing parenting is a terrific joy, because it allows me to see where I was able to successfully seed some leadership traits into my children, and maybe where I could still be giving them some useful advice that is not that's not too deep in their business, but might help them as they grow. So for me, success is creating the most other leaders as I possibly can. All right, next question. Well, directly related. What does work-life balance mean to you? One of my least favorite phrases. People who interact with me on a regular basis have probably heard me say this. So, work-life balance, this great mythical, magical seesaw of balancing your work and your life. Here's why I don't think the metaphor itself works, let alone how people will ever find an answer to it. Your work is part of your life. And if we go back to the purpose question, if you are working towards your purpose, then that is your life's work. And so separating work and life to establish some kind of balance, to me, is a faulty pursuit. And what I mean by that is I do believe it perpetuates a misunderstanding that work is not part of your life. Now, that is not the intent of the question, I understand, but I got on my little soapbox for a reason. So the intent of the question, I think, anyways, is how do I make sure that I am working to live and not living to work? Which is maybe a different way to ask the question that's more pointed at the answer people are really looking for, I think. So how do you make sure that you're working to live? In other words, the work that you're doing is affording you the life that you want, versus living to work, which is, I get home from work just in time to go to sleep so that I can get up and I can go back to work kind of mindset. Now, again, if you are working towards your life's work, that is not something to shy away from. It is not something if you're working towards your life work and you want to be the person who gets home just in time to go to sleep, to get up and do it again, then you should continue to do that. Conversely, if you're the person, I mentioned my 5 beautiful grandchildren, my middle son has 4 of them, and he prioritizes time with his children over time on the job. So for him, it's an entirely different question. He's simply looking to answer, how do I, inside of a set time frame, 40 hours in his case, how do I spend those 40 hours in a productive enough fashion to pay for the life that I want to live, which is to spend as many hours as I possibly can with my 4 children. And that's a question of what are the essentials in your life, how much do those essentials cost, and then what job lets you make that money in 40 hours, hopefully with enough to save for the future. So kind of a different take on the question. I personally don't believe in work-life balance because I believe that work is part of life, a critical part of life. I think that the human animal, if you will, is designed to work. We are compelled internally, intrinsic motivation compels us to work. And so separating the two, to me, feels very artificial. All right, soapbox over. Next question. At what stage should you start thinking about succession planning? Okay, So this is kind of a management question and a leadership question. And so I will separate the two and I will answer them both the way that I believe, or with the answer that I believe to be true. So from a leadership position, or leadership perspective, when should you start succession planning? Immediately, and every day thereafter. The role of a leader, in my view, at the end of the day, is to make more leaders. And if you're not thinking about succession, then you can't do that successfully. Essentially, I think every day about driving depth. So in my day job, I have a small team that I am responsible for managing, and then I have a larger company in the role where I am leading. So it is both a leadership position, which if you've watched this video, I'll try and link it on my page, which is the landing page video. You know that I think that there's a sharp and distinct difference between leadership and management. So from a leadership standpoint, the answer to when you should start succession planning is immediately, and you should do it always. Leadership is about people. Succession is about people. You should be growing your people every chance you get. Now, from a management perspective, there's a slightly different take on it. When should you start succession planning? From a management perspective, you're saying when should you prepare for somebody else to take the role that you're currently in? And I think that depends on your time in the role and what the role is. So for example, if I am a middle manager who is responsible for product delivery for a specific product, I should start thinking about succession planning pretty quickly. And the reason is the company is relying on producing that product. If something happens to you, even for a short period of time, they need somebody who can step in and still deliver the product. So very similar to the leadership answer, that's a pretty immediate need. If you are a more senior manager in a more senior management role, there is a necessity for you to assess the people who are your direct reports, and then what you might refer to as a skip level, so your direct reports and their direct reports, and take some time thinking about who there has the potential. What do I mean by that? So you're going to spend most of your career interacting with high performers. You might not think that, but the reality is if you look back, you'll find that a lot of people that you've interacted with, they're high performers. You're always going to have somebody who's not a high performer. You're always going to have colleagues who maybe aren't doing the best job. But by and large, you're gonna encounter high performers. If you're watching a video like this, chances are you're surrounded by high performers, for being honest. So performance becomes then a given. And so from a management perspective, at a senior management level, when you're thinking about succession, you have to look at potential. So as you're evaluating potential, you're beginning a succession plan, but you're not planning for succession. At this point, you're still assessing people and making determinations of who could fill that role, because it is very possible, and I know that people don't like to hear this, but it's very possible that there is not somebody with the potential to fill that role inside your current management pyramid. And so succession planning may involve characterizing a job description that needs to be advertised outside, which means also then you need to confirm that you have budget to hire a person, etc. So the when to start succession planning is when you can clearly and adequately define what that role is and needs to be. And then there's a significant amount of analysis that needs to follow before you actually begin executing succession planning. All right, next one. Still have quite a few in the stack. May have overdone it here. Oh, this is a good one. What is one thing you would change about your leadership style? One thing I would change about my leadership style, without question, is to be more willing to delegate early on. I tend to do, in my own head, essentially a miniature cost-benefit analysis on tasks and say, is this something I can do faster if I don't delegate it? And I will often fall into the trap of, if the answer to that question is yes, doing it myself. And now here's where that's bad. Should you delegate everything? Of course not. Can you delegate everything? Also, of course not. If the answer to the question, is it faster for me to do it myself, is yes, and so based on that, you decide to do it yourself, you are robbing yourself and somebody else the opportunity to learn how to do it the way that you might do it. And you're also robbing yourself of the power of diversity, which is seeing how somebody else might do it and seeing if that's better than your way. So that is the one thing about my leadership approach I could change, or I work to change and strive to change, but would change if there was a magic wand and I could just wave it and say, what's the one thing you would change? That is it, how I delegate. A little bit of a management thing more than a leadership thing, but it goes to leadership in that keeping a piece of work for the sake of efficiency might be better from a management perspective, but it is poor leadership practice. All right, next one. Looking back, what one decision would you change and why? Wow. I don't have a good answer for this one. What one decision would I change and why? A couple of years ago, I made a hiring decision. Nice enough gentleman, qualified for the work, but I knew going in that he was not a fit for the organizational culture as it existed at that organization. And I maybe arrogantly thought that I could drive some change in that culture, and that he could help be a catalyst for that change. And it ended badly. The CEO of that company came to my office and told me that individual was not a fit and that I needed to terminate them as soon as possible. So why was that a bad decision? Because I knew that he wasn't a fit, and I put him into a very bad position. Because he did end up, of course, being terminated, and that was unfair to him, and I put him in that position, and so that is a decision I would change. Now, the flip side of that question is we all are where we are as a result of decisions that we've made in our life, and so if you spend a lot of time dwelling on what decision you would change, you might be doing yourself a disservice. Because you don't want to go down the avenue of regret for things. But it is important to examine the decisions you've made and be ready the next time you have an opportunity to make a better decision based on decisions you've made in the past. You should take it. All right. Oh, here's one I get asked. How do I get started in leadership? Well, at the risk of being glib, you just start. How do you get started in leadership? So I think that the nature of the question falls in line with the belief that you have to be appointed to be a leader. And I would just love to disavow as many people as I can of that notion. You can lead from where you are right now today. What I would say is, rather than when do I get started, is how. And I would say that there's a set of behaviors to really focus on, having empathy for others, thinking with an eye towards the future, thinking about today with an eye towards the future. Those are some things that will place you into a position to be ready to lead. But when do you start leadership? When you want to. Oof. So this question was asked me by the same person who asked me one of the other questions earlier that I struggled on, the purpose question. Do you have to go through hardship to find yourself? I struggle with this one because I went through hardship to find myself. I decided to go through hardship to find myself. Let me rephrase that. Some people are placed into hardship because they made some decisions and the results didn't turn out the way they expected, and so now they find themselves in a position of hardship. In either case, I believe that hardship speeds up the process, but I do not believe that you need to go through hardship to find yourself. So let me expound on the thought. So I believe that hardship helps you find yourself faster because it strips away social masks. I think some people have an innate ability to strip away social masks, and some people, frankly, never develop social masks. And so that is a part of knowing yourself, is being cognizant of what your social masks are, when you're wearing your social masks, and why you're wearing your social masks. So that's an element of knowing yourself. Another element of knowing yourself is some determinations about how do I learn? How should I learn? What am I learning? I think all of those are elements of knowing yourself. And it's a continual journey through life, knowing who you are that day, knowing who you are in that moment. So there's an element as well of, as I said, living in the present with an eye on the future, that helps you to know who you are. But it's a tough question. It's a tough one. And I don't know if I answered it with that ramble. But in the essence of time, and because I don't have a better answer, I'll move on to the next one. How do you get others to follow you? The core or crux of leadership. How do you get others to follow you? So there's an old adage that a leader can get somebody to do something that they don't want to do and be glad they did it. So how do you get others to follow you? There's an element of charisma to that, but charisma is not the answer to the question. I think that there are people who believe it is. Influence is part of that, but influence is not the answer to the question. It's part of it. I think at the end of the day, how you get people to follow you is based on a level of trust that you've established with them for some reason or another, and as well, those people understanding that they are following you, and that implies that the leader is a doer. In other words, a person is more willing to follow you, or might be willing to follow you, because they are seeing the example that you are setting. So there's an element there of first you have to lead yourself before you can lead somebody else. You have to be somebody who's worth following before somebody will follow you. And I will just add a little cherry on top of that sundae by saying, in order to be a successful leader, you have to be a willing follower. So that's a conundrum that I think a lot of people, conundrum is not the right word, but we'll go with it. That is an element that I think a lot of people who talk about leadership miss by a lot or altogether, which is you can't be a successful leader if you're not willing to be a successful follower. But I do think that the way you get people to follow you, the most important thing that you do to get people to follow you is set an example that people want to follow, which is doing something, right? A leader can't be passive and they can't just sit on the sideline. They have to be doing stuff. All right. How do you encourage creative thinking? I think a leader encourages creative thinking by setting a safe space or a safe environment for creative thinking. That can come any number of ways, but I think that the way that works for me, or the way that has worked the best in my personal experience, is very simply listening to people. And this is where you really have to actually listen to the person. What I mean by that is, too often people get stuck in a mindset of they are listening for how they are going to respond. And I would just offer you or invite you to listen to actually hear. Your people every day, the people you work with every day, whether you're a manager or you're just their colleague who aspires to lead, those people are bringing up good ideas every single day. They're being creative every single day. And the more you listen to their ideas and the more you play back their ideas for them and the more you encourage those ideas, the more creative they will be. It is a virtuous cycle that you encourage, that creates the environment where creative thinking is encouraged. I'll use a very recent example from this past week, in fact, where a colleague of mine set aside time for doodling. And I think that you could go to a lot of organizations, and if you heard somebody said that they spent the morning doodling, you would think that they spent the morning wasting their time. But that's not the case. What this person was doing was putting together a framework for how everybody in the meeting, where this came up later, where everybody could think about the problem a little bit differently. And her doodling was basically an infographic, for lack of a better way to say it, of this framework that she was exploring to help everybody think about the problem in a different way. So she ended up reframing a problem set for everybody on the team by doodling. So giving people that space and then truly listening to what they have to say is, I think, how you create or foster creative thinking. All right. Coming down to the end here, just a few cards left, and another hard one. What makes a good leader? That's it depends answer. What makes a good leader? I will start with some universal traits that I think make a good leader. Universally, I'm going to double down on listening to hear. makes a good leader. Why is that important? Number one, because nobody has a monopoly on good ideas, and if you're listening to respond, you're missing at least some part of an idea that's being conveyed to you. Number two, it encourages the people around you to continue bringing up their ideas. And number three, it empowers them to know that maybe next time they could take another step. Maybe the time after that, they could take 2 more steps. So I'm going to start with listening to hear as the most important thing that I think, most important quality that I think makes a good leader. And you might call that leading with empathy. Lots of people do. But with my own, we'll call it my own neurodivergent background, I try and avoid boxing people in with a term like empathy. I could explain it ad nauseum. If you're interested in me doing that, just drop a comment and say, what do you mean about empathy, or something like that in your comment, and we can have that discussion. But it's the same idea, right? When somebody says leading with empathy, that's what I hear. I hear that them saying, I want people to listen to what I'm actually saying, and be present for me when I'm saying it. So that's a big one. Another good quality of a leader, absolutely critical in my opinion, is the willingness to make decisions. And also the willingness to not make a decision. So I think the first part is obvious. I think the second part probably needs a little bit of explaining. So here goes. What I mean by that is there are times when people will pressure you to make a decision, and it's up to the leader to make it, to analyze the situation, understand how it aligns strategically with the vision or end state, and really make a decision about making a decision, and understand if it really does need to be made now or if it can wait. And I'll dig into that a little bit more. Some people have a bias towards action. They're great to work with. They're the people who are saying we have to act now, we have to do something now. And they're absolutely terrific at moving the organization into its future. And they are typically characterized by wanting somebody to make a decision now. And so sometimes you have to push back on that urge to just make a decision now, or the influence of somebody who has a bias for action to make a decision now and hold on the decision because it's not the right time. But when it is the right time, it's absolutely crucial for a leader to be willing to make a decision. And then finally, I am going to add just a third one, which is I believe it's absolutely crucial for a leader to focus on always learning. Lifelong learning is maybe an overused term or an underdefined term, depending on how you want to look at it. But a person who aspires to lead or is actively leading should also be actively learning. None of us knows everything, and none of us knows enough, in my opinion. So anyone who is a leader, for a person like myself to consider them a good leader, they must be learning. All right, so that's 3 things. I think that covers the topic pretty well. All right, so 3 more questions in my deck. And this one's a doozy, brought to you by the same person who's asked some of these other doozies. How do I bring my real self to work? Wow. That is a tough question. So it's about authenticity, and it implies so many other things. It implies that you know your real self. So we talked a little bit about that earlier with one of the other questions in this video. Not only does it imply your real self, knowing your real self, it also asks so many other reductive questions. Like, am I safe to be my real self in an organization or at work? And that is a question that the individual has to answer for themselves. And I hope if they don't feel safe bringing their real self to whatever situation, that they either find a better situation or identify the reason they don't feel safe and bring that up to somebody who might be able to affect that situation. Now, in the case of the person who actually asked me this question, we've had a number of conversations about it, so I know that their intent was they have a goal of being true to themselves in every situation, and they maybe feel like they haven't quite achieved that goal, in particular in the workplace. Now, I will tell you that this individual has sold themselves short, and I've let them know that. A number of crucial cultural elements of our organization have been brought to the organization by this individual, by essentially the sheer force of their will. And so I think that they're doing better at this than they give themselves credit for. But be that as it may, how do you bring your real self to whatever situation you're in begins with knowing yourself. We talked a little bit about that, as I said earlier in the video. And then being willing to be yourself. So there's an element of vulnerability that you have to be willing to convey or exude, expose yourself to. Pick your verb and adverb of choice there. So there's an element of authenticity, as I said. There's an element of vulnerability, as I said. And then there's a component of self-confidence. So part of confidence, realistically, in my opinion, is understanding that we all have a self-interest and being okay with that self-interest. So in every situation, we bring self-interest. If you're volunteering at a soup kitchen, people would call that selfless, and it is terrific. It is great work, and please continue to do it. But there is some self-interest there, if you're being honest. Most people who do something like that are doing it because of the way it makes them feel. And they deserve that. They deserve to get something out of it, and they deserve to feel good about themselves for doing something that is charitable like that. So I think that breeds confidence. I think understanding that self-interest is okay, understanding what your interest in the situation is, builds confidence. And I think that confidence is crucial to bringing yourself to the situation that you're in. All right, so that was a tough question. So we'll see what's left here. What are the most important decisions you make as a leader? I will say that the most important decisions, in my opinion, that a leader makes begin and end with people. So decisions that you make about people are the most important decisions. That is where you can have the most impact, is in the lives of other people. And that impact can be positive or negative. And so those decisions need to be carefully considered and reasoned and in line with your personal values, not somebody else's values, not maybe your organization's values. The decisions you make about people need to be rooted in your personal values. or they will lead to regret. And we should seek to live lives without regret. All right, last question. I think I already answered this question. How do you know what success looks like? I think we covered that one, but it's a good topic to close on. Because as I said earlier, success is about how you define it. So what does success look like for me is helping other people to lead, and spreading more leaders into the world. And that's why I'm doing these videos. And so if you like them, please subscribe. Please put in the comments what topics you would like to hear about from leadership. And in the meantime, back to more about people. Remember that you are a gift to others. Thanks.